So hello, welcome again. Now, what would we find if we open the skull and look at brain from side or from lateral side? Now, let's talk it about all this stuff you can see from here up till here. It's your actually forebrain. Now, let's make it up. Let me make it up. All this stuff you can find from here up to here. This is all your forebrain. And this all is your actually forebrain. Now if we talk about this part, this is actually your part of brainstem called as cerebellum. Now if we trace it downward, you will find spinal cord here. This is your spinal cord. Now what's different between your brain and spinal cord? Actually your brain is contained in your skull, and there is opening at the end of your skull called as a foramen magnum, through which your brain is connected with the spinal cord, and your spinal cord is actually contained in a different set of bones called as a vertebral column. So now let's look at brain from medial view. This was the lateral view, lateral side. Now let's look at brain from midline, not a medial view, from midline. So this is actually the view of brain from midline. Now let's talk it about. As I earlier mentioned, the part from here up till here is actually your forebrain. From this up to here, this is your forebrain, and from here up till here is your actually brainstem. If we talk about brainstem, your brainstem is divided into two parts. Your actually midbrain and hindbrain. This is midbrain and this is hindbrain. This makes up actually your brainstem. Now let's talk about some actually functions of your brain. It's a very basics. Let's talk about voluntary movements. Now you very much know that voluntary movement is movement of your voluntary muscles. Now you know there is a one type of neuron which leaves CNS and goes towards your muscles, your voluntary muscles, called as a motor neuron. And you know motor neurons are very special in the sense that they are very rare. There are only tens of thousands of motor neurons out of 200 billion. Out of 200 billion, only 10,000 neuron 10 20 to 20,000 neurons are motor neurons, so they are actually very rare. Now if we talk about motor neurons, where are your motor neuron found? Actually your motor neuron are actually found in your brainstem, and spinal cord. Now there are no motor neurons in forebrain. If we talk about motor neurons, there are no motor neuron in forebrain. Motor neurons are only found in brainstem and spinal cord. If we talk about motor neuron found in brainstem, are responsible for the movement of the facial muscles, movement of your larynx, your smiling movement, or the swelling movements. These neurons in brainstem are responsible for that movement. If we talk about the motor neurons located in the spinal cord, they are actually responsible for the movement of your limbs, your trunk. All that sort of movement is done by motor neurons located in your spinal cord. Now let's talk about perception. You know what is perception? Perception is the perception of sensory input, or you can say it the appreciation of sensory information is called as a perception. And you guys must know that perception is totally dependent on forebrain. You know, perception is totally dependent on the forebrain, this part of brain. And you know there is a special part of forebrain called the cerebral cortex, that is responsible for perception of sensory input. All these valleys, all these bumps and valleys you can see here is actually the cerebral cortex. So information have to come from brainstem up to from spinal cord up to brainstem, then to forebrain, and even to cerebral cortex to be perceived. Now the perception of information is totally dependent on your cerebral cortex, right? Now if we talk about homeostasis is dependent on brainstem and spinal cord both. Brainstem actually deals with the homeostatic function on hormones. Actually the hormonal homeostasis is dependent on brainstem, and autonomic homeostasis is dependent on spinal cord. We'll talk it about later on. Now let's talk about the higher abstractive function. Now what is higher abstractive function? Higher abstractive function is actually perception, like your memory, your language, all sort of these actions are actually your higher abstract function, and your higher abstract function is totally dependent on your forebrain. So your forebrain is responsible for your memory, your language, your movement, your not your movements but your memory, and your memory, your language, all sort of these higher cognitive functions. Forebrain is responsible, but a specific part of your forebrain called as cerebral cortex is responsible for higher abstract function. Now, if you even lose neurons in your spinal cord and brainstem, even if you lose your brainstem and spinal cord, you can still keep alive your abstract function. You can still think. You can still can make dreams. You can speak. Your language and all sort of stuff can still be very much possible. So a couple of weeks ago, I was going through a book. I was reading a book known as The Diving Bell and Butterfly, written by a fashion designer, Bobby. He was actually editor of fashion designing magazine called as Bobby. So actually he had a brain stroke, and he was diagnosed from the locked-in syndrome. You know what happens in locked-in syndrome? All the movements, all the neurons or the motor neurons which are responsible for the voluntary movements are actually degenerated, and only the movement of eyelids is possible. So he wrote this book with the movement of eyelids. So, and he died after publishing this book, and it was a very good book, and I went through this a couple of weeks ago, and I thought that I must tell you guys about this book. So this was very basic overview, a very basic lecture. I tried to explain the basic parts of brain. So when we'll dive into deep, I'll tell you all this stuff, and we'll learn it in deep. So thank you very much.